Good morning, everyone. I think you've heard my not short speech, so I will not make additional introductory comments, but I'm happy to take questions.
Premier, what's your reaction to the Ethics Commissioner's report yesterday? She exonerated you, but she had some concerns about some of the practices.
Well, first of all, I was very pleased to have the Ethics Commissioner exonerate my behavior. We work very hard to try and stay within the rules, and we'll continue to do that. She made some observations about certain practices and procedures and guidelines that could, in fact, be put in place, and I'm hoping that those will be discussed at the all-party committee, and we'll and try and work with them.
Will you be continuing to have those kinds of fundraisers?
The ones that we had in Alberta, you mean? Are you talking about the one in Alberta?
Where companies are invited to extra special meetings with you and
So you're talking about the one in Ontario?
the one you canceled.
Oh, okay, well, that wasn't companies, because companies aren't allowed to donate to our party. Those were individuals. So what will likely happen, because in Alberta, as you know, neither unions nor companies can donate to the party, we will continue to have fundraisers where we ask people to give us money. That's what the party will do. In some cases, they may ask some people to give us more money. The Ethics Commissioner specifically said where we have events that are differential, that we should advertise them too. We're happy to do that.
What about the ones outside of the province?
You know, I think generally speaking, as I've said, of course, those aren't relevant in Alberta because corporate donations and union donations are not allowed in Alberta. I won't say that I would never attend one again. To be clear, when I asked my staff to consult with the Ethics Commissioner about my ability to have my expenses paid on the way there, it was always my understanding that I would have to be disclosing those expenses and that my trip to the fundraiser would be made public. So there was certainly never intent to not have it public, because it was always understood by me that it would have to be public. That being said, we may attend those in the future. It's not a priority for me, quite frankly. I'm very busy in Alberta right now, dealing with the economy, dealing with the need to promote job creation, dealing with the need to manage our budget. So that's my priority. But should something like that happen again, I'm certainly open, or quite prepared to let people know if I'm going to such an event.
Did you do a similar one in British Columbia?
No.
The Walderos is also concerned with you fundraising for a party in another province that is against pipelines.
You know, I am not entirely sure what their position is right now. I do know that we've been part of going to these events as an opportunity to make our case to places where some people are not in favor. And so I've gone to a number of different events, quite frankly, out east, where I've actually been speaking to people that the previous government didn't actually get a chance to talk to. And in doing that, what I've done is talked about the need for a pipeline, talked about the role that pipeline in our industry plays in the overall national economy, talked about the number of jobs that are impacted in each jurisdiction. So there isn't consensus necessarily across the country, either between parties or between provinces. But I'm going to take every opportunity I can to make our case in every setting, which is what I did at that event and what I've done at other events sponsored by environmental groups as well.
In your speech today, you talked about Bill 6, really emphasizing the consultation process. Mm-hmm. Why is that an important message for this crowd specifically? And have you heard concerns from them about the consultation process?
Not specifically, but we know, of course, that farmers and ranchers are their primary constituents, or some of their primary constituents, and so we know that it continues to be a concern. We think that we've had some positive conversations, in fact, with the Agricultural Coalition, and then I think people are becoming a little bit more comfortable with where we're going on this. But we need to continue to make that case and to continue to assure people that there will be ample opportunity for consultation for the key stakeholders throughout the process and for the public before any long-term decisions are made. So I thought it was a good opportunity to reinforce that message and that principle at today's event.
What did you mean when you said you won't surprise them with? Are you talking about cuts to the MSO?
I'm generally speaking about any of the major pieces that would impact this particular level of government or other stakeholders as much as possible. Our view is to try and work collaboratively with people. So if we make a change, people see it coming. So for instance, the climate change levy was fully, there was extensive consultation and engagement, and then we made the announcement, and then we're moving forward, and so no one should be surprised by that. And you're not going to see a situation where suddenly we introduce a budget with massive changes that nobody ever saw coming, or that nobody was engaged on, or nobody was consulted on. Will we always agree at the end of the day on every change we make? Perhaps not, but people and citizens and key stakeholders will always be given the opportunity to be fully heard, and we'll try to canvass as creatively and as collaboratively as possible the best path forward to come to the best solution. And so when I say no surprises, it's kind of a principle that I want to try to inject as often as possible into our government. We're still learning, but it is something that I try very hard to ensure guides our decision making.
You didn't mention MSI. Is there going to be a cut to MSI?
I'm not going to disclose the budget, but I will say what I did talk about today was stability, predictability, and no surprises. So I think you can draw some pretty clear conclusions from that.
We're going to go to the phones now. Operator, can you put the first caller, please?
The first question comes from Rick Bell from The Sun. Your line is open.
Good morning, Premier. You may have addressed this somewhere else, but I'll ask you anyway. What are your thoughts concerning the business groups that are really sending you a letter and really going after central parts of your government's platform?
Well, I think that some of what their concerns are concerns that they ought not to have. I think Minister Ceci made the point fairly clearly yesterday that apart from what we've already announced, for instance, as I've already mentioned, the climate change levy, there are no new taxes being contemplated at this time, and so they needn't worry about that. There are, I think there is a number of things that we're working on with respect to working with business in terms of creating a good environment for job creation and for economic growth. And there's some things where we disagree, and we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But we will continue to work with them, and I think actually on many levels we'll be able to find some common ground with respect to the point they made yesterday. But I think it's important to remember that on that larger issue of taxes, that was litigated in the election. We've talked about it since. We're following through on what we promised to Albertans. I think it makes sense. And overall, even when the climate change levy is in place, Alberta will continue to have the overall lowest tax regime in the country by a long shot.
Right, but they're still fighting some of the stuff that you put in. So they did criticize the carbon tax. They did criticize your $15 an hour minimum wage. They did criticize your already existing increases to corporate and in some cases personal taxes at the high end. I mean, how do you feel when they're still sort of objecting to stuff that's already in place? They're not just objecting to future possibilities, but actually realities today.
Well, I mean, actually not all that stuff is in place quite as of yet, but we've been pretty committed on most of them. So, I mean, we're going to have conversations and political debate throughout this term. And there were some of the issues that they raised that I think we may be able to find consensus on, and some of them where we won't. And this is what I've said before. In some cases, we're simply going to have to agree to disagree. I believe that overall, the approach that our government is taking to job creation and economic growth is a sound one. We have the Conference Board of Canada specifically identified that our capital plan has measurably increased the GDP of this province. That's jobs. So that's one thing that we're doing, and I think they agree with. We're making more capital available and access to capital available for business leaders, for job creators, and for innovators. And we have additional plans that will be announced in the budget, and I think that many of those folks will find them appealing. Are we going to agree on everything? No. Do I believe that the Climate Change Leadership Plan in addition to doing the right thing in terms of taking action, long overdue action on climate change, will actually turn out to be an economic diversification tool. I do. I actually think it's good news for the economy, not only in terms of improving our record internationally and nationally for the purposes of expanding our markets for energy, but also in terms of helping to reposition and adjust our economy and to support diversification efforts. So I think in the long run, it will be seen as good news. Some people are a little nervous about it, and that is what it is. But there's lots of parts of it where there's still room for consultation, and we'll continue to work with our partners as we move through those.
We have one last question on the phone. Operator, please put through the next caller.
Next question comes from Don Braid at the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Premier, I have one very specific question, rather down to earth, and one more general one. The first one is your MLA Connolly apologized this morning to the House for having flipped the bird, or in more traditional terms, given the finger to a female member of the Wild Rose Caucus, after first sort of denying he did it, but I understand a table officer actually saw him. How do you respond to this example of bad behavior from your own group?
Well, as I know, as I believe you're aware, I mean, or as you just said, in fact, he did apologize in the House today, and so it's my view that people need to take responsibility for their actions and apologize where they made a mistake, and I think it's clear that he did, and he did apologize. So, hopefully, I think members of the House are prepared to move forward on it, and certainly moving forward, the direction to our caucus is that kind of behavior, of course, is not acceptable.
Now today, just on the more general question, Wild Rose introduced formally their jobs plan. There's really not that much new in it, but it sort of formalizes the things they're asking for, including an immediate drop in the corporate tax, small business tax that is, to 2%, including delaying the carbon levy and a good many other measures that contradict directly what you're doing. Could you give your early response to that?
Well, actually, I found it interesting because I don't think they were actually calling for a reduction to the corporate tax. On the issue of the small business tax, I would suggest that we simply all stay tuned for the budget. There are a number of pieces of their recommendations that actually reflect a lot of what our ministers said. To me, probably the critical area where there is a difference is on the climate change plan and on the climate change levy. Now, I appreciate that the Wild Rose has a somewhat fluid relationship with their belief in science. However, my view is that this is something we have to move on. And as I've just said before, we have to move on it for environmental reasons, we have to move on it for economic reasons as it relates to the ability to promote and market our energy product, and we have to move on it from economic reasons in terms of how it relates to our ability to diversify and support community infrastructure around greening the economy. So, and as I've always said, every cent that is collected from that levy will be recycled back into the economy. Now, some folks think that the only kind of recycling that is warrants the term is where you give profitable businesses and wealthy Albertans tax breaks. I don't agree. I actually think, for instance, that recycling that focuses on supporting low-income housing and efficiency measures for that low-income housing, therefore saving everybody money and also reducing emissions from that low-income housing, is actually also a good way to recycle. So it's those kinds of programs and those kinds of priorities that we'll be looking at. Generally speaking, I think that there's some good stuff in their plan, and there's some things where we disagree, and we'll continue to agree to disagree.
Does Alberta have room to lower the business tax?
I'm sorry, the corporate tax?
The business tax.
The small business tax.
All the opposition has called for a 1% lowering of the business tax. How do you feel about that personally?
Well, I think that, as I've said before, we have been meeting with business leaders and we've been talking to stakeholders across the province about how best to stimulate economic activity. And there's no question that that's one of the issues that's been presented to us. And we're considering a whole package of issues which will be announced in the budget.
Paul, did you have the last question?
You said a couple of weeks ago the appointment of a facilitator for transition out of coal would be announced. Is that in the budget as part of the package, or is that about to happen? Are you about to announce?
I believe announcement is coming up in the next few days.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.